Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Chapelwaite. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, I thought was interesting when we opened up with the Marcella situation, because now, because we always kept getting a different story when it came to the Steven situation. Because at first it's like, oh, Marcella, fell down and, broke her back. But then I was like, that's a lot of blood. And it seemed more likely, with the whole thing about the Boones being cursed and going mad. I was like, he most likely killed his daughter. Then we got the perspective on, yeah, he did kill his daughter. And then he hung himself. But then we find out that's not the truth, because it turns out Steven had already become a vampire by the time Marcella was hot, because it turns out she's the one that actually hid the book. Because I thought that was so interesting, because it kept being yeah, someone stole the book. I was like, who was it? Would it be anyone in town that steal the book? It's no, Marcella hid it, because I guess she knew it was significant in some shape or form. Because we finally get the full story from what's her name, Elizabeth, the babysitter or whatever. It turns out when the doctor of the town, as well as George the constable, ended up demanding answers, knowing what's happening to Mary and everything. It turns out Marcella found, Elizabeth found Philip and Stephen dead, but Marcella was just thinking they're just asleep, which is that her justification was Marcella was probably just too overwhelmed by it, so she tried to justify it. But then it's Philip came to me and he was yeah, we're fine. He was back from the dead. Don't tell anyone about it, or I will drain the blood from you and Marcella. And so she's kept quiet this entire. She's known, because when Charles came to confront her, it's she was super dodgy about the conversation, and it's now it's because she's known. Because it's messed up. Marcella's already dead. You could have at least done something, spoke up sooner. All this death and destruction falls on her. You let Charles and his children move into that place without letting them know. And she's yeah, and I'll be damned for it. It's be damned all you want. I get it. She's I'm going to basically go to hell for it. I'm going to suffer for it. But it's still it doesn't change the fact of what you've done. You can it's just, you can lament on it now, but it's why'd you keep quiet? Especially after Marcella died, because we got the context for that is, sadly, Stephen didn't actually kill his daughter. Because it makes you wonder, maybe the context of that scene is actually, now knowing what we know, that she accidentally, because basically she fell down the stairs because she was trying to, defend herself from her grandfather and her father. Because it's you guys are monsters now. And she had a pair of scissors, and she tried to run, she ran down the stairs to, the basement or the cellar, and ended up tripping, and the scissor stabbed her in the neck. So we did see the scene of, Stephen hanging himself, so maybe after she did that, he tried to hang himself, but it's right, I'm undead, and that's not going to be enough to kill me. So maybe that's the full maybe that story she said wasn't 100% a lie. Maybe it's just she left out the detail about him being undead, or maybe the whole him trying to hang himself thing was complete and utter BS. So I actually feel bad, because it's technically they are responsible for her death, but I was certain Stephen went crazy and killed her, because obviously before we didn't really even know about the vampire thing. We just thought oh, the Boones, there's a curse on them that makes them go crazy. But then it also seems oh, maybe there was a sickness, but it's no, it's a straight up curse, because it deals with the mysteries, the mysteries of the worm. So that's a whole angle in itself. So that's fascinating. And since I did bring it up earlier, because George did bring in Martin and the doctor to be the wounds on her, it's we checked some other people, they've got wounds. It's this is real. Because then the moment, now he's hearing other people bring this up, Martin's yeah, Faith, she brought it up too, that, these people, they feed on people, they drink their blood, and it's okay. So it's Martin, can you stay here with Mary? And even then, Mary's kind of oh, where's George? And he's oh, he'll be right back. And she's basically, it's okay, could you give me water? Do you want to, can you pray for me, essentially? Because for her, it's she talks about a God, and I'm the moment she's talking about a God, I'm oh, you're not talking about the Christian God, you're talking about the worm, aren't you? Well, because she was oh yeah, I hear his voice. The moment it's oh, you're talking about, well, I'm assuming she was referencing Jacob, because it's yeah, he was going to give me eternal life or something like that. So, because obviously they learned from Elizabeth about, right, you can't, they're she'll just keep getting drained of her blood until she dies, or if she drinks of his blood, she'll become one, and there's no turning that back. Once again, like, throwing out these conversations recently without spoiling anything, something else I watched recently had this element, because I also, when I was watching something recently, I also referenced Chapelwaite, but kind of like the vampire thing. Like, this thing kind of like stayed away from the vampire thing, but it was kind of essentially a vampire, which is interesting. Because this was like, oh no, this is like, no, we're straight up vampires. It's like, what does that even mean? It's kind of a foreign word and concept. Obviously, this is like way back in the day. So it's not like you could be like, oh, it's a pop culture thing, like people would know. It's like, no. This is back in the day anyway. So like, you can get away with people going, what the hell is a vampire? But nevertheless, obviously we're picking up as well with Charles, because obviously we're going to tie like everything back together. But we start out with Charles, returning to Chapelwaite with Loa's body, and he kind of locks himself in the room. It's just because it, like, you know, Honor and Tanner just like, what's going on, like, but he's not saying anything. He just you know, puts aside his little girl's hair and just like holds her hand, and he's just like, I love you and I'm sorry, you know. And then later on sits with well, it's with Tanner and Honor, and it's like, right, we'll give her a proper burial. They didn't bury, I guess because they didn't want to take the chance maybe someone would try something to her body, like specifically like Philip or Steven. But I mean, I guess it's just because of their heritage, like, hence why they did the same thing to their mom. So we do see later on that Charles does the same thing for Loa and gives her a sea burial. Now, I don't know whether that's just borderline from him being a sea captain and that's what that is, or whether that is like a part of their mom's culture that's part of theirs as well. And obviously what adds to the tragedy of it all is Rebecca, you know, blaming herself. It's like, right, you entrusted me to look after your children, and I failed, you know? And it's just like, she'll never forgive herself for that. But on top of it, it's like, the reason why Loa ran away in the first place is because she read your book. And even explaining it to Tane and Honor. She's not even saying, like, you should forgive me. She's like, I hope one day you will forgive me, because I do love you all. And I should have never wrote what I wrote. It's just, I'm a writer, and for my job, I was worried about my own, like, inability to write. And so she took their story, and I was like, right, it's not my story to take and try to make into my own and stuff like that. And so because that's for her, that's the double betrayal of it all. It's because you're writing about this family who are innocent victims in this crazy, complex situation. What you did kind of led to Loa's death to a certain extent. I mean, to be fair, Loa was already dealing with, like, so much on top of everything else. But then you add in the fact is that it's like this family welcomed you in with open arms. Like, because even Charles talks about it. He's like, I confided in you, like, about what was going on with his mental state, even what happened between him and his dad. Those are stuff he probably would have only told his wife, and the fact is that he opened up to you and not anyone else speaks volumes, you know? And that's a heartbreaking thing, too, because he's like, at the, like, you know, it's like, right, it's about nighttime, so you need to stay here, but once tomorrow comes, you need to pack your stuff and go. And he's like, you know, did this story end up the way satisfactory to you? And see her kind of tearing up, because it's like, no, it's not what she wanted. She didn't want this at all. It wasn't like, it stopped being about a story anymore. Granted, you can't really say that fully considering she kept writing, but it's also, she made it clear last episode, she has feelings not only for Charles, but the kids too. Like, she loves them, like, but, you know, and now it's just kind of like, that's all kind of going, and it's like, right, like, even if I do admit how I feel about him, because she was like, I don't know how he feels about me, and like, maybe that's why it hurts even more, because Charles did start caring about her. But also, she even compared herself to the vampires, interestingly enough, where it's like, here are these creatures that skulk in the shadows, and she's like, how am I any different from them? Like, the fact is of like, yeah, I showed up into this family's life under false pretenses, pretending to be someone there, trying to help them out, while, you know, everyone in town, like, disparaged this family and everything, and I stuck around for my own personal reasons, you know, my personal gain, you know, so that's kind of like the sad development of that situation. But at the same time, with all of this happening, we do have Faith and Martin talking about getting away, but Martin's giving her one ticket. It's like, you and Henry get out of here, because for him, it's like, I do believe you. It's like, but, you know, they obviously, like, Philip fears to cross as Jacob, and she's like, Jacob fears nothing. Will it have an effect on him? Maybe because they're more like low-ranking vampires. Like, maybe he's like a pure blood to a certain extent, and they're more like, they're vampires, but maybe they're more like ghouls, so a lot of that stuff that wouldn't affect Jacob will affect them. And it's actually interesting, because I think Martin I mean, it was actually really interesting. Martin's like, right, this is my congregation. Like, the fact of the matter is I need to stay here and help them fight whatever's coming. Which for her, it's like, I wish that you could see that dying for them isn't some penance for our love. You know, because it's like, because he did betray his wife and everything, and he feels like at the very least he owes it to the congregation for like his misdeeds, his sins, is to make up for it by fighting for them. But she's like, right, you don't need to die. It shouldn't, your penance shouldn't be you dying for our love, you know? So takes Henry and leave, and Alice is watching the entire time. And sadly, Martin is unaware, but Faith, you know, as she's leaving town, they get attacked, and the promise, they end up taking her baby and stabbing her to death. But she said an interesting line where it's like, oh, you know Jacob doesn't care about his children, or doesn't want on his children. So I'm like, okay, so it's not necessarily Martin's child, or is it because, like, there's some, like, I'm curious, like, is that, like, she's trying to pretend like it's Martin's child, because, like, admitting, like, where it really, because maybe the moment she saw the baby being born, it's like, it's not because of, like, oh, because Martin's chalking it up to be, like, maybe it's kind of, like, oh, kind of payback for the fact is that I stepped out on my wife and had this affair and we had a love child. But I think maybe initially Faith realized, like, no, this is Jacob's baby. Or, but like I said, maybe it's because of all that he's done. Maybe, like, there's a seed kind of planted in her DNA or something. And so the moment her and Martin had a child, it warped because of just a mixture of what's, like, in her DNA from Jacob. I don't know. I'm leaning more like, I mean, because it also depends on the continuity. Because, like you take Vampire Diaries, like, that universe, like, vampires are unable to have children on either side of the board, male or female. So, like, I don't know if, so I don't know if that kind of applies across most, if not all, vampire lore or whatever. But, so that's why I'm like, if that being actually his child, I don't know. But at the same time, Martin's dealing with, you know, Alice and her father, which it's like, you could bring up, like, right, I know my transgressions and everything, but there's an evil to fight. But it's like, you can't really tell anybody about it. You have to be prepared and ready for it, but you can't let anyone know, because, I mean, Alice and her dad definitely ain't going to listen to you. You're going to sound like a raving lunatic. So, I mean, even aside from the current situation, no one would have really listened to you. Only the people in the know are going to, well, know. So he's keeping that to himself. He is apologizing to Alice for not being strong enough to just kind of be there for her after what they lost. And he just kind of gets his stuff and leave. So you also had George killing his wife because he'd rather her die herself rather than become one of them. So he suffocates her with a pillow. And at the same time, you know, you have Charles being ready because it's like, right, they're going. Philip and Stephen are going to come here, and we're going to be ready for them. And Lois, like, no, and Honor's like, you got to make them suffer for what they did. And he's like, oh, they will. They won't answer for what they've done. And so, but the voice that comes out isn't Philip or Stephen's, it's Lois. And I was like, oh, okay, so we are. That's why I'm like, I keep chalking it up to being Vampire Diary rules, like that universe's rules of like dying with vampire blood and you brings you back. But I'm like, is that just typically how that all... Because I guess in my mind, I always thought, like... I guess, like, when you become a vampire, like, what happens is they'll bite you, and then you die, and like, kind of like a zombie, like... and, like, The Walking Dead have the infection... Well, you're already infected. It's just, like, the infection from a zombie bite will just rapidly kill you, and you just automatically come back, like... I guess most vampire stuff works like that, or maybe... Because I thought that was just a Vampire Diaries thing of, like... Because it, like... Because I think it is, like, even in, like, Van Helsing, I think when you get bit, it's automatically, like, you, once again, like, you die and immediately come back. I don't think, well, it's no, because it's not even that, because in that, you, like, immediately start changing evil while alive, so it's not like a death and you come back. That's why I'm kind of, like, I mean, in certain cases, that's why I'm, like, unclear about how that 100% works, like, whether that, like, is it all across all vampire fiction, or is that just certain ones? But it's like, right. Because I was wondering about that last episode, whether or not he'd go to Charles or something. I mean, that Charles would go to, like, Philip or Stephen to try and bring her back. But, no, like, she was automatically coming back, like, the moment, like, they killed her. That was the whole point. And now she's on their side. And now for her, it's like, I'm not coming back to you, Dad. Like, look, like, they were able to fix me. Like, you're the reason why my leg was where it is. But look, my leg's healed. I'm with my family. Like, I'm not having to deal, I'm not in pain and suffering like I was with you. So, the problem is, like, some of that humanity gets lost, obviously, when you get transformed, you get seduced by the darkness. And so Stephen's even saying, like, oh, help us find the book, you know, you can join us. Like, Jacob, the moment you give him the book, he's going to kill you. But you give us the book, like, we'll work together, like, we'll make you part of our family, we could all be together. But he's like, no, like, what you've done to my daughter, I would never join you. You're a monster. But it's kind of like, right, if you do this, we'll let the rest of your children talk. Because it's interesting, because Stephen seemed like he was the more reasonable one, at the very least, because he was heartbroken the moment Marcella died. Because, I mean, it's a situation of she died, and he was unable to make her one of them, so it's not like they have eternity together. Philip was just kind of like, yeah, whatever, who cares? Like, I think at that point, maybe he was far more gone than, he was going a lot further than Stephen was, and maybe Stephen's just kind of finally gotten to that point where he's just kind of like numb to it all. He did, like, I think that's the extra reason why he took Loa, is because he said, right, you remind me of Marcella. So he wasn't able to get Marcella with him for all eternity, so he kind of makes up for that. I mean, him and Loa is his family anyway, but it's like the fact is that she reminds him a lot of Marcella, like, just, like, I think probably personality, but also, like, visually, that also is an extra reason why he took her amongst anyone. Because he just knew he could be able to easily feed off of her anger and, like, pain and loneliness and kind of make her an easy target. But it's also, like, right, it's meant to be, like, his own reasons for doing it because of Marcella, not being able to do it for Marcella. The means of getting Charles to do what he wants because it's, like, inflicting his pain on you. Like he was saying, like, there's no greater pain than, like, there's no pain like a parent losing a child, you know? So I think all of that is kind of a mixture of everything is the reason why he's done what he's done. So it's like giving Charles the opportunity to, like, right, listen to the book. Don't, like, we know you can hear it, because that's another thing for Charles too. It's like, you brought us here under false pretenses. You lied to me to get me and my family here. So another strike against that Elizabeth as well, because it's like, not only, once again, more and more death, and now Loa. Like I said, maybe killing Jacob will be like because I brought that up recently. I don't know. I know it works with werewolf rules if you kill the person that turned you. But usually it's like if you kill, like, Dracula, you kind of get rid of all vampirism. Not in all continuities, but in certain ones. That's why I'm like, I don't know if that's like a general rule in vampirism or not. Or whether, you know, like I said, whether that's just mainly like a werewolf thing or not. Because it's not just Loa, because obviously Mary rises. The sad thing is that, granted, Mary was going to die from the illness, and it would have eventually taken its toll, so when she died, she would have come back. George just sadly expedited the whole situation, so, and he was planning on killing himself after doing what he did, but now it's like, she's back, she's risen, and that's going to probably, like, make things kind of run amok in Preacher's Corner. Shadows are stretching pretty far across. I'm curious to see where this all takes us, because at the very end you have Charles kind of turning, and everything in his vicinity looks like worms, so I guess the call from the book is getting that much stronger. So how do you handle this development from Loa? Like, I mean, as Elizabeth said, kind of like, there is no way of turning them back, there's no saving them, so, like, she's stuck this way forever, so eventually Charles is probably going to have to kill his daughter. Like, that might be the only way to save her, or like I said, maybe there is a means of reversing it. Who knows? It's sad that things have played out this way, that things have gotten to this point, but it's definitely going to be interesting to see ultimately where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.